Hello, I'm Colleen, and let's talk about my absolute undying love for mystery author Carol Goodman. Something I think is really fun at my age, which is approaching middle age, is that there are certain authors who I've really gotten to follow along their careers, and Carol Goodman is one of them. I read my first Carol Goodman mystery in the year 2000, and I haven't stopped. I still get really excited when she has a new book come out, and it's been really fun to follow her for 21 years. Carol Goodman's books are kind of like literary mysteries. There's usually some sort of like writing or literature or folklore aspect or history to her mysteries, which I adore. This video is only going to be about her adult books written as Carol Goodman. She also writes YA, and she also writes under two pen names, Julia Dark and Lee Carroll, and I haven't read any of those. I do only read her like straight adult mysteries. Before I get into all of her books, I wanted to give you some blanket content warnings because I don't want to give away any like major plot points when I'm talking about the books, but some of her books do have some content in it that is upsetting for certain people. There's one book when I get to it, I will give a specific content warning because of what it is, and it happens right at the beginning, but otherwise, here we go. Her books sometimes include suicide. They sometimes include loss of a pregnancy or loss of a child. They sometimes include inappropriate relationships between teachers and students, sometimes getting to the point where it's like a statutory situation. Those are the main content warnings that you might want to approach these books with a little bit of caution if needed. Also, obviously, these are mysteries, so they do all deal with death and murder. Okay, let's start with her first book published, which is The Lake of Dead Languages. And I actually have the UK copy because I bought it when I was living in London. And this book has definitely been put through the ringer. It's like the spine is completely broken. The pages are very yellowed. I've read it twice. My sister read it. My roommate in college read it, and that might be it. So it's been read 4 times, so it's definitely well loved. At one point, some pages were falling out, and I think I might have lost a page. I'm not 100% certain. Nope, I did. Look at that. It goes from 106 to 109. So I lost page 107 and 108. Who knows what happened on there? I'll have to remember that. I can't lend this book out anymore because it's missing a probably important page. So in this book, Jane Hudson is the narrator, and we go between 2 different timelines. The present is when she is a teacher at a boarding school called Heart Lake School for Girls. It's in upstate New York, which as I go on, you will see that upstate New York and protagonist in a teaching position is one of her hallmarks. Jane was also a student at this school, and so we flip between the timeline of her as a professor and her as a student. When she was a student, there was a terrible tragedy that happened, and she had a front row to the tragedy. Now that she's a professor and is really hoping to leave the past in the past, pages of her missing journal start showing up that detail what was going on at the school when she was there, and she starts to get really concerned that history is going to repeat itself, and maybe the evil and tragedy that happened in the past isn't over and it's going to continue. I have been thinking a lot about reading this book again because the first time I read it, I was, I think, 21. Yes, 21. And then the second time I read it, I was 24. So both times I read it, I was much closer in age to Jane in the past than in the present. And now I'm much closer in age to Jane in the present. So I think I should reread it and see if it changes my opinion on the book. But this is a 5-star read. Definitely a great mystery. So many dark academia vibes if you like dark academia. Definitely some really good creepy vibes. Great opening. There's like it's not a prologue, but there's just like an opening sort of like beautiful prose section, and it begins with, "The lake in my dreams is always frozen. It is never the lake in summer, its water stained black by the shadows of pine trees, or the lake in fall, its surface stitched into a quilt of red and gold, or the lake on a spring night beaded with moonlight. The lake in my dreams reflects nothing. It is the dead white of a closed door, sealed by ice that reaches 60 feet down to the lake's glacial limestone cradle." So much fun. The next book that Carol Goodman published is The Seduction of Water, and this is actually the first one I ever read. I got it as a gift for my 21st birthday from my mom. I don't have it with me. I think it's either at my parents' house or I might have lent it to someone. I can't remember. But this is the one that started it all for me. Our main character in the Seduction of Water is Iris, and she's sort of at a weird point in her life. She's almost a professor, she's almost a published writer, and she's feeling kind of stagnant where she is. Her mother was a very famous writer, and she decides to write a story based on the bedtime stories her mom used to tell her about selkies, which I also really love folklore, so this was so much fun. And this is actually the reason my mom got me the book, because she knew how much I liked selkies, which are, if you're not into like Irish and Scottish folklore, they're basically shapeshifters who are like seals in the water and women on land. After she writes this story, Iris's mother's literary agent contacts her and tells her that he always thought that her mother had an unfinished manuscript that was never published, and he'd love her to find it. And so Iris kind of gets into that idea and goes to the Catskills, where she grew up and her mom died in a fire. And she starts to look for the manuscript. She ends up uncovering a pretty haunting mystery while she's looking for it. There's another part of this book that I really liked, and that is that Iris was formerly a writing teacher in a prison, and she kept in contact with one of her students, and they have a relationship in this book, which I really liked. And I don't know if I've ever read any other books that follow that, like someone who has taught someone while they were in prison, but then they continue their relationship outside. Again, a 5-star read, really fun. If you like selkies, definitely read this one. From here on out, I read them mostly in chronological order as they are being released. So the next one, and the next one I read, is The Drowning Tree. Again, I used to own this. I'm pretty sure I gave this one to my sister, so I think she has it. Our main character is Juno, and she is trying to avoid the college reunion that she should be taking part of going on in her town. She had to leave her senior year of college because she got pregnant and didn't get to graduate. And then 2 years after they got married, her husband was basically sent to a mental hospital. And so she feels like there's a lot of judgment surrounding her years in college, and she doesn't really want to see anyone she went to college with. But her good friend Christine is speaking at the reunion, so she decides to go to support Christine. After Christine gives a speech that's pretty incriminating towards a very powerful family that has donated quite a bit of money to the college, Christine goes missing. Juno is determined to find out a lot of things. She wants to know what happened to Christine. She wants to know if Christine found out even more stuff about this family and it was enough to kill over. She wants to know more about the mystery surrounding this family, and she even wants to know what happened to her husband and why he ended up in the mental hospital. One thing I really liked about this book in particular is that our heroine / protagonist, Juno, is a glassmaker, and Carol Goodman did a really cool job like describing what it's like to make glass. It was a very fun added bonus to the story. Next, we've got The Ghost Orchid. This one takes place at the Bosco Estate, which is a fictional place, but it's a place where artists can be in residence and kind of work on their art for an indeterminate amount of time. There are 5 artists in residence right now at the Bosco Estate, and the main resident is Alice, who's our narrator. Alice has come to write a book on Aurora Latham, who is the founder of this estate, and specifically what happened during the summer of 1893, in which a very wealthy family came there to basically have a seance to try and contact their 3 children who had died of diphtheria recently, because it's the 1800s, and there had been a diphtheria epidemic, and 3 of their children had died. During the seance, someone dies. So Ellis is writing a book about it, but as she starts to research it, she and the other artists kind of get together, and they realize that there might have been something even worse going on that summer, and that it might still be going on, and sort of like the past has followed them to the present. Honestly, this is my least favorite Carol Goodman novel. It's still good. Like, I would still give it probably like 3 stars, maybe 3.5 stars. But compared to her other ones, this one just didn't like hit me as much. But that's not to say you wouldn't love it, because I know a lot of people really liked this when it came out. This came out when I worked at a bookstore. And I worked in the children's department, and the woman who was in charge of the mystery department loved it. Next is The Sonnet Lover. And this one was a little bit different than what we had had so far, because most of her books so far had taken place in New England, and they'd had like very American feel. The Sonnet Lover starts in the United States. Rose is a literature professor, and one of her students pens her an anonymous letter about these missing Shakespearean sonnets that are about like the dark woman. If you've ever read Shakespeare's sonnets, there's like this dark lady who comes up sometimes. And this student believes that there are lots of missing sonnets that have to do with this character. After that student dies mysteriously, Rose decides to go to Tuscany where these supposed sonnets are hidden and try to find them. When she gets there, she runs into her first love. She used to live there. And she sort of is getting pulled back and forth between figuring out this mystery and rekindling their relationship. I really liked this one because it had a very different atmospheric feel, which all of Carol Goodman's novels are very atmospheric, but this one had like this Tuscany vibe, which was very different than New England, but really well described and very fun. Her next book, The Night Villa, also takes place in Italy, which makes me think that maybe she went to Italy and did a ton of research. Now, this one has a very specific content warning, which I am going to tell you right now because I don't think it's fair to recommend this book without it. This book does have a school shooting in it, and it opens with it, so it's not really like a plot spoiler. So Sophie Chase is a professor at a university in Texas, and there is a school shooting. And after that happens, she survives it and is present, but she's obviously has a lot of post-traumatic stress from being involved in it and decides to go to Capri in Italy for kind of like a sabbatical and to do a bunch of research while she's there. She's a history professor. She mostly studies the Mount Vesuvius eruption, which is like the Pompeii story that we're all familiar with. And when she's there, she is working in a historical site, basically like a villa, and researching the family that lived there, but also researching one particular slave girl who ends up really capturing her attention. She discovers a labyrinth hidden beneath the rubble. It's filled with antique documents that were thought lost, so she has like a lot of new stuff to research. While I was prepping for this video, I realized that I didn't remember how this book ends, and I loved this one. I remember when I was reading it, I thought it was fantastic. There's very like specific scenes I remember from the book, but I can't remember basically the second half. So I think I might reread it this year. I do want to reread some of my favorite books this year, and I think this might be a good one to do. The next book Carol Goodman wrote is Arcadia Falls, and this one has a bit of a similar feel to The Lake of Dead Languages, so if you like that one, I'd recommend this one. Meg is a recent widow and has a teenage daughter. She gets a job at a boarding school in upstate New York, and when they move there, she's very excited, but as soon as they get there, everything feels kind of like sinister. They're moving into a cottage that was supposed to feel quaint, but it sort of feels haunted. There's just a lot of like bad feelings surrounded their move there. During the first bonfire of the season, a student falls to her death, and at first is deemed an accident, but then as a little more in-depth investigation happens, it seems like she was murdered. Meg really wants to find out what's happening, and she doesn't trust the police officer who's in charge of the investigation and starts to kind of look into his past, which is very dark. This is another good dark academia read if you really like dark academia books. Next is River Road, and our protagonist is Nan Lewis. She is a professor, and she is on her way home from a holiday party and hits a deer. She gets out of her car to find the deer and see if it's okay, and she can't find it, and she can't find anything that she hit, but her car is totaled, and it starts to snow, and she decides to just walk home because she's not that far away from her house, rather than try to find someone to tow her car in the middle of the night. The next morning, she's awoken by the police at her door saying that a student was killed in a hit and run, and they found her car, so she's basically like the main suspect. They think she did it. Nan is really upset because she knows she hit a deer, she knows she didn't hit a person, and her entire community turns on her really quickly, which a few years earlier, they had been extremely supportive when her daughter had gotten killed in a hit and run accident on this road. This is like a very dangerous road they have in town. Nan begins to sort of dig through everyone's life in town to try and figure out who did it, and she finds a ton of hidden secrets. The next book Carol Goodman wrote, I haven't read yet, and it's The Widow's House. I'm going to read it. Probably this year, but there was a small area where I didn't read her books because I was having a lot of babies, and this was one of the ones that came out then. The next book is The Other Mother, which I am currently reading. Hey, so it's editing day, and I have finished reading The Other Mother, which I was in the middle of reading when I originally filmed, And I felt like I couldn't post this without a pretty severe content warning on that book, which it does have at the beginning of the book. It starts with a page saying, if you are experiencing postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, not to read this book. And I just wanted to reiterate that because, sorry, there are my children. I would go so far to say is that if you are pregnant or have had a baby in the past year, not to read this book. I am 4 years out from having my twins, and while I thought it was fine for me to read at the moment, I don't think it would have been fine for me to read for a while after they were born, just because of, certain like postpartum anxieties and issues you have, or not everyone, but I had after having a baby. So there's my warning. The book was good, and I'll have it in my wrap up for February, but this has some serious content that you need to be aware of. And I'm about, I think, like 75 pages in. Another content warning, very specific. This one deals with postpartum depression and psychosis. So I didn't read this one. It came out right when my twins were born, and I think it was smart that I didn't. I just got it this month to read. And it's creepy so far. Daphne's our main character. She's running away, and you're not exactly sure what she's running from, with her daughter. And she gets a job as like a personal archivist for a writer who lives in the woods, of course, next to a mental hospital that I'm sure has a very dark past. You're also, at this point, not certain where her husband is or if something happened to him. She talks a lot about her friend, and you're not sure where she is or if something happened to her. I'm liking it so far. It's got good creepy vibes. I'll probably finish it in the next 2 days. Next, we have The Night Visitors. The Night Visitors has 3 narrators, which I think it's the only one with 3 narrators. I'm trying to think. There's some with 2, but I think this is the only one with 3. In this book, we have Alice. Alice is running away from an abusive relationship. We have Oren, who's 10 years old and is traveling with Alice and is obsessed with Star Wars. We have Maddie, who's in her 50s, and she's a social worker, and she is trying to find someplace safe for them. They've never met her before this night. So when the place that she's supposed to take them doesn't work out, Maddie takes them home. She has this really fast connection with Oren. He reminds her of her little brother who died as a child, so a very long time ago. And they end up spending the night in Maddie's house. So this kind of follows the night. What happens? Who Alice is running from? Why Maddie's past has left her so haunted? And who Oren is. This one is so fast. I think this one's under 300 pages, and it's a really, really quick read. Also, this one has such good winter vibes if you want to read a scary winter book. Next is The Sea of Lost Girls, which I read about 6 months ago, and I love this book so much. So, Tess is our narrator. She is a teacher at a boarding school in upstate New York, of course, and she has a husband who's very prestigious at this school, and she has a 17-year-old son who goes to the school. Tess has some mental issues going on, and at the beginning of the book, you don't know exactly what is happening, which I always like when a book starts out like that. Tessa's son, Rudy, calls her at 2:50 in the morning and asks her to pick him up. And they have this relationship where if he ever needs to get out of a situation, she's not going to ask any questions. She'll just come and get him. So she does come and get him. He's soaking wet. He's on campus. She brings him home. He goes to bed. She goes to bed. The next morning, they find out that Rudy's girlfriend died right around the same time. And so now Tess starts to wonder if she knows her son. Did her son kill his girlfriend? What happened? Did he see something? Is he not telling her? Throughout, Tess has had this big something happen when she was younger that had to do with the school. And so you're also learning what happened to Tess when she was a teenager, what's going on with Rudy now. There's great local folklore that the title has to do with the Sea of Lost Girls, with young teenage girls disappearing in this area. That's fantastic. There's also a really good afterword in this book that I would recommend reading. Another good dark academia vibes, but definitely different because told from the point of view of a professor rather than a student. Next is The Stranger Behind You, which I did read recently and review in one of my wrap-ups, and I can't remember what month I read it in. I think I read it in November. But this one takes place in New York City, so there's not upstate New York vibes. And it starts in summer, but it very quickly becomes autumn to get nice and creepy. We have two narrators. The first one is Joan Lurie, and Joan has just written an article that basically has taken down a media tycoon who is kind of like a serial sexual harasser and assaulter. She is celebrating with her team. She has gotten publishing offers for books. Everything's great. She's walking home and someone follows her into her apartment, hits her on the head, and chloroforms her. She wakes up the next day and she has no idea what happened to her. So she has this big advance from a publishing company and takes it and moves into this building called The Refuge. It was a Magdalene laundry, which were mostly in Ireland, but some in the United States, which were places for like fallen women to come work, and they were terrible places. But this one's been transformed into like a really, really state-of-the-art, high-tech fortress to keep you safe. So it's the only place she feels safe. She's also having weird visions and weird memories, but she has head trauma and she didn't go to the hospital, so she doesn't actually know if anything around her is really happening. Our other narrator is Melissa Osgood, who is the wife of the media tycoon she took down. And Melissa Osgood as a narrator is one of those characters that is so well written, you just hate her so much. You hate her so much. And she's written like, oh, this woman. She becomes obsessed with Joan because Joan basically ruined her life because she was like living pretty and like super wealthy, and starts following her. Lastly, we have a character who's not a narrator but is very important. Her name is Lillian Day. She's 96 and she has lived in the Magdalene laundry for like 70 years. So we also see like the history of the Magdalene laundry through her eyes. It's a really great read. I honestly probably wouldn't have read this one if it hadn't been by Carol Goodman because of the content with like the sexual assault, which I don't usually like to read very much of, but it was great. Very good. Lastly, I wanted to let you know about her upcoming book because I'm so excited for it. It's called The Disinvited Guest, and it is coming out in July. This one's set in the future, and Lucy Harper is the narrator, and she is dealing with the after effects of the 2020 pandemic. So she has lingering health problems and a lot of PTSD from living through it, which we can all sort of relate to. When a new virus surfaces years later, she and her husband flee the city and they go to a private island that his family has owned for years that's off the coast of Maine, and they invite 5 other people who are family and friends. While there, Lucy starts to research the really dark past of the island, which was a quarantine island for typhus patients. This seems like it's going to be sort of like a psychological thriller because in the description it says Lucy can feel like the past resurfacing and she doesn't know what to trust and what's really going on. So I can't wait to read that. Now, those are all her books, so let's rank them. So from least favorite to most favorite. Number 11 is The Ghost Orchid. That's the only book I've ever read by Carol Goodman that I didn't like. Boom, love, as soon as I read it. So after that one, it was a little bit more difficult to rank them. So I sort of went through which ones stuck with me the best and which ones I would want to reread. So number 10, I'll put River Road. Number 9, Arcadia Falls. Number 8, The Night Visitors. Number 7, The Stranger Behind You. Number 6, The Sonnet Lover. Number 5, The Seduction of Water. Number 4, The Night Villa. Number 3, The Drowning Tree. Number 2, The Lake of Dead Languages. And number 1 is The Sea of Lost Girls. I love that one so much. It was one of my best books of 2021. If you watched that video, it's really, really good. So this is my Carol Goodman appreciation video. I hope you found a book on here that you love. I hope you find one, read it, and then you're like, oh wow, I'm going to read her entire backlist because her books are fantastic. I need people to continue buying them so she can continue getting them published. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See ya.